There we go. Can you guys see Trust 401? Yep. Okay, that's good. Um, so I don't have slides, but what I got, I'll just show you. This is the entire thing. This is it's a bit like Miro, but it comes with Mac and iPhone and iPad, and it's called Freeform, and it just allowed me just to I won't tell you where I was sitting where I put much of this together. Um, you can amuse yourself trying to figure that one out. And just allows me just to wander around here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of kind of warm-up stuff, sort of conceptual stuff. Don't worry, there's no exercises. And then I'm going to talk little bit about the Godfather, of course. And then I'm going to talk about three tools that I've just found really, really useful. And the first one is not like rocket science, but I invented it. But that said, I'm sure there are many different people around there who've done something, very, very similar. And it's just called a trust map. And I just find it really helpful, and I use it with my clients. And one of my clients, kind of, I suppose, I'm not trying to think how to put this. She managed to, but by building this, she actually managed to grow her career massively by building this trust map and then just working from there. Um, and hang on, I'm just going to make sure that this thing don't beep at me when someone comes in. There we go. So I'm going to talk through that one. So it's just just a simple, most obvious little thing. And yeah, quite useful. And then I'm going to talk about the trust equation, which is not my material, but it's really, really, really useful. It's a way of looking and kind of teasing trust apart. And then I'm going to talk about this stuff, which is possibly the most boring stuff that you'll ever hear. I promise you. So something to look forward to, but it's actually really incredibly obvious and helpful, and no one does it. And it's some stuff from a guy called Fernando Flores, who was once thrown into jail by Pinochet in Chile. And while he was there, I think he was bored and he put this together. So I'm going to come back to that, and then I'm going to wrap up and talk a bit about cats and dogs. Okay, so we're kind of made up here. And what if anyone wants to ask a question or interrupt me or anything like that, just please just go for it. I'm quite likely to. I did this yesterday and it ran for 90 minutes. And we had sort of questions during it, which was quite helpful. And some of the questions, of course, were really, it's like I had a stooge in the audience. A question was asked and it led me to the next bit. So you pop some things in the chat if you feel like it. Interrupt, disagree. But now I have to declare this up front. I am not an expert in trust and trust building. I think there's someone on the call, hello, who might well be an expert in trust and may have actually written a book about it. Um, and I haven't read it because it's not in English. But now I always struggle and I always feel really embarrassed by this. Whenever I know we've spoken before, but Jan, I can never do the J's. What
It's a soft yay. It is Jan. Yeah,
Jan?
you might spell it with the Y, the
The
English
why.
Y.
Thank
So
you. It's a,
Jan van der Spoel. Yes.
thank you. Well, Jan's, I can do. I could have done the Vander spill. I think.
Yes.
But yeah, the J's are put there to torment people like me.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, so Jan's written a book on trust, and we talked about that a while ago. Um, but unfortunately, I don't read Dutch. Um, but if anyone does, when we talked about it, it just sounded really, really fascinating. So I kind of feel so. Actually, yesterday I didn't have to say this about me not being an expert, and there'd been someone in the room because I kind of was the expert in the room. But the reason I mentioned it yesterday is that the stuff I've got here, these three tools, are just little frameworks that have helped me see trust, um, and build it and rebuild it, and help people. And it's just something that I think all of us have got probably bits and pieces of this in our head intuitively. And I just got three frameworks that have made me able to mentor and teach this stuff to other people. But I'm no by no means an expert. And you're all just as expert as I am, because this is just how people work. And I just hope this might make it a little clearer for you. Dan, are you in Holland? Am I right with that? Did I invent that? Ah, so Dan and Jan, you two should shake hands virtually in the chat.
Indeed, indeed.
Lovely. Okay. All right. So
Just to give you a little bit of credit, Clark, if I may steal you a second. This is actually my book, 360 Degrees Trust, and this is
yes.
your trust
Hey.
trust map with all the accreditations in there. So I do borrow from you, and this is why I'm here as well, because your view on how the simple tools and how to make it real actionable is even for me very 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 useful.
Oh, that's really cool to see that. I know we talked about it, but you know what's actually for all I know, you could be saying, here's an example of how stupid people do this. Don't do this. Whatever you do, don't do this. His name is Clark Ching. Don't do that. And I'll never know. And we'll be friends forever until I learn to read Dutch. Okay, cool. Hey, it's nice to see it. I'll stop being silly now. And I just want to so the title for this is something that I actually stole from a chap, and I've forgotten his name now. He's in Ireland, and he did this really good talk, and I can't remember what it was, but it was advanced whatever for beginners. And I have done so many talks since I've seen his that have been advanced whatever for beginners. And none of us are beginners, but it's just a really nice way to think about it, because there's some really advanced stuff that is actually really simple in almost every domain. And so I really hope this helps. Right, I have now spent far too long talking about that. I am going to click to the next slide. So there's the big picture. We start with a dictionary definition and we end with a cat. Okay, so I really like this word, comity, uh, and I particularly like the second definition, and this might reveal my political leaning, but Anthony Scaramucci, who was for I think 13 days, the White House secretary for Trump until he got fired about 8 years ago. I've heard him on a podcast use this word quite a few times. It's just sort of a word that I think had been missing in my life until the last 2 years. So it just means that courtesy and considerate behaviors towards others. And you'll see lots of fancy stuff here, and definitions and diagrams and things. But I reckon it kind of just boils down to this. But the word I would use is being trustworthy. And when you're trustworthy, it's a way of acting, and you kind of know, am I being trustworthy? Is that person trustworthy? Are they being trustworthy? It's both something that you can make a judgment about and say approximately measure, and it's also a way of behaving. So I guess it's a noun and a verb, maybe. And there's a word that goes with this quite nicely, which I have known for a long time. But again, it's kind of like the vibe of these two words. You've got comity, which has been courteous and considerate towards others, and it's collegial. It's like working with colleagues. And I just really like those words. And I think this is a statement I cannot prove, but I reckon there's a really strong correlation between productivity and those two words. I reckon. Equally, it could equally be true that there are a lot of arseholes out there who've been very, very, very successful by not being like this. So maybe it's just a bias. Okay, so I just wanted to share that word. Feel free to use it freely. I think it's a lovely way of thinking about the world. Right, now we're going to go from one extreme of all lovey-dovey up to another. The Godfather movie. There's this scene where the Godfather is talking to Tom Hagen, who's the chap on the right here. played by Robert Duvall. And the Godfather says to him, "You're my peacetime consigliere, my peacetime advisor." This is Don Corleone. He says, "You're my peacetime advisor. We are going to the mattresses. We are going to war with the other mafia families. I need a wartime advisor. I need you to step aside." Okay. So I just like to think that there are some people who are good at being at war, and there's some people who are good at operating in peacetime. And just to go back to another old movie, if you've ever seen the First Blood movie, the very first Rambo movie, John Rambo comes back and he's a wartime, he's a wartime guy and he's come back to civilian life and he just can't fit into society and all sorts of things go bad. So uh, this is kind of like peacetime tools, but I've used it a lot to take, maybe not a lot, I've helped others use it a lot, and I've used it a bit myself, to think of when you're doing work, sometimes wartime, you can turn it into peacetime if you act in a trustworthy way. So that's why I think I titled this Rebuilding Trust. Um, hopefully I'll get back to it later, but if I don't, I'll just say I had my most significant project I've ever actually ran hands-on when I used to do real work. I started it by sitting down and making a promise to the COO and the CTO of a company who had the most horrible, horrible relationship with their biggest customer, a bank. And I sat down and during the sales conversation, I got to the end of it, and I'd been really lucky in that I had worked for a consulting company that sold trust. So I had words in my head around trust about and how to speak about it. And at the end of it, without even thinking, I said, "Hey, look, I promise you, I'll make a promise that I come work for you. What I will do is, of course, I'll deliver this thing on time." I'll use Agile, I'll use TOC, all this other stuff, but I'll use trust more than anything. And my promise to you will be that I will rebuild trust between you and the bank. And the short story is we did, but that was effectively a very, very conscious choice to run the project in a way that rebuilt trust. And it was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, that choice. And you should have seen their faces when no one had ever articulated that before. But I kind of had this advantage in that because of the company I had previously worked with, I could sort of see trust or see its absence, and I could talk around it. And so that's why I think it's worth sharing this. Otherwise, it's invisible stuff. But really neat if you can use it. Now, just I'm going to have there's a warning here. This is actually not this is easy for me to talk through this and give you positive examples. But let me give you a non-positive example, and which was, I suppose, a negative example, which was pre-COVID. I got a gig working for a government department here in New Zealand, and they got me in as a change manager, and they wanted to make a lot of change, uh, and when I got there, I realized after a while that there was a civil war going on inside, and I was a peacetime change person, and they wanted a wartime consigliere, and I didn't have the skills they wanted. Um, and I ended up leaving because I just couldn't achieve anything because what they wanted was to win, not to win-win, if you like. So it can be easy sometimes, but it can also be really, really, really tricky. But if you were to roll back to my vendor and bank example, they had the worst relationship I have ever seen. Every time they had a project, it was almost like a human rights violation to get the staff on either side working on a project together. It was so horrible. And maybe because that was just so extreme, it was the easiest one to make the big improvement. Okay, right. Now, has everyone seen The Godfather? Because I was just going to say, if you haven't, hang up. Go and watch that now. It's better than this. Anyway, there you go. Okay, so a trust map. Right. Okay. So this here is just if we were sitting down and I was having sometimes a friendly chat, a mentoring chat, whatever kind of chat, like a coaching chat, what I'd do is we sit down and after we got to know each other a little bit, I would say, right, I reckon it'd be really useful if we drew a trust map. And you'd go, oh, what's a trust map? I've never heard of that. And then I'd look around, and depending on how we were working together, I'd either say, let's go to the whiteboard and grab some yellow stickies. Or I'd say, oh, Miro screen. Why don't we go in there and together, we're going to pop some stickies on the board. Or if you want to, we'll do it in uh, Google slides. And we're just going to get something just like what you see in front of you. It's just got boxes and arrows. Um, and we would then get that set up. And I say, right, grab one sticky and just write on it, me, big letters, in the middle of it, and stick on the wall. Right. Now just think, run through, grab a bunch of stickies and just think of the people that are around you at work who you kind of interact with. You might like some of them, you might not like some of them, but just the people that, and you might come up with, I've only got a few here, but you might come up with, say, 5, 15, 25 people, and you just write their names on, boom, 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 boom. And then what you might do, notice I'm using the word might a lot here, because this is very free range. It's you're trying to draw a map. And now, if we go back in history a long time, one of the greatest map makers in the world, historically speaking, was James Cook on the Endeavour. The reason he was so successful um, as a explorer was that he was actually really good at doing maps. And if you look at the early map of New Zealand, it's got kind of like the shape of it, but it's really rough. But it was much better than having no map at all, and they could fill in the details later. So what we're doing here is you're just doing a map. We just go me in the middle, bunch of people there. And then what you've got a few people there, you might just grab some of the stickies and put some of them that are closer to you, and you put them closer to you on the map. And then you get some others and you might put them further away. Uh, and then you might get some other ones and just move them around. They'll just jiggle around and it's all, you're just making stuff up as you go along here. And then you might look at it and you might go, I'll grab one of them. And let's say it's Belinda here. And I'll just grab Belinda. And I look and go, and let's say I'm in PowerPoint. I go, right, we actually have a really strong relationship. And then we go, how might we represent that? Why don't we put a line between them and make it nice and thick and black, right? Okay, so we do that. And then you might go, but I don't really have much to do with Belinda these days. We talk to each other every day or so. We bump into each other. You go, why don't we make it dotted? We'll leave it thick. Okay, cool. And then you might look at others and move them around. And like you see here, we've got Farouk, dot, 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 dot. Uh, maybe not strong. Maybe there's more dots on that than the other one. Remember, we're just making up something just to draw it out. Because what we're not trying to do is get this wonderful, brilliant, perfect map. What we are trying to do is just figure out sort of 2 or 3 things. And that and it, like if you know the theory of constraint stuff, what we're trying to figure out is where to focus. Okay, so that'd be the first one. So I've got Alan there. I've put this big arrow next to Alan because I've decided, or we've decided when we work together, we look at it and go, Alan and I probably got a reasonable relationship. I don't know Alan that well. He doesn't know me, but we do interact quite a bit. Um, but I reckon it would be good for both of us if I were to focus the next 3 months on just getting a little bit closer, building little bit more trust with Alan. And it doesn't matter what you do and how you go about that, but we'll talk about some of the things. But what's really, really useful is that you just go, I think that's who I would like to focus on just for the next few months. The others, I'm kind of happy with them, but I think Alan is the most useful person here to just get to know a bit better, to build some trust. And I'm going to focus on that. So that'd be the first thing you do. The second bit is that by choosing to focus on one, you've effectively chosen to say, not focus on the others. So you're going to strategically procrastinate and not try and go out of your way to build trust. Now, when I say when you focus on Alan, you're not going to turn up with donuts every day for Alan, because that would feel so false and it wouldn't work. You're just going to try and just over time. So say you estimated that the level of trust at the moment with Alan was 2 out of 5. No, let's say 3 out of 5, which is pretty good. And you just wanted to take it to a 3.5 or a 4, and you got 3 months to do that. So little improvements here and there. The third bit that you might do, and again, another movie reference, if you've seen the Alien movie, whatever you do, don't let the lesson from that is don't let an alien that bleeds acid into your workplace. Okay? Some of the people that come on this map are going to be like that alien, and unless you are really, 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 I'm not even sure what the word is, emotionally strong and politically powerful, just avoid those aliens that they're gonna try and kill you. And every workplace has a few. So what you might do on this is you might put a little containment corner here on the trust map and move them, and pop the one or two up there and just say, okay, those guys, I'm going to avoid them like they're a bad part of town. And that's effectively it. So that's one layer of it. So you might just use that for yourself. You go, oh, okay. So I have got one client who happened to pick her Alan, and we worked through it. And she just thought, I really like that guy, and I think he's going to go places, and I think he needs a hand. And she kind of goes, but I don't think he kind of. And so over time, she became closer and closer to her Alan, and did effectively become his trusted advisor. And there was a lovely kind of synergy, not like those little fish that swim around and clean out the gills of sharks. It was maybe a little bit like that. Whereas her Alan actually got more and more successful. She helped him become more and more successful because he had a trusted advisor. And so this was all just really totally virtuous stuff. But she just decided that's someone there that I would like to build trust with. And for all I know, he could have had someone else doing a trust map, and identified her as someone that he would like to build trust. But I don't think so. I think once she started thinking, no, I want to spend a bit of time, and we every couple of months would just revisit this and move some people off the map and move some people back on, and we move things around, and we would talk about trust a lot and how it works, which is what I'll get to next. And that made a huge difference. So now, what you could do with this, and I don't think it would be a very good idea. There might be bits of this, but you'd have to be very careful how you did it. You could get everyone to do a trust map. You could then get it put into a tool that got everything, and then you together, and then you could, kind of like you do with Myers-Briggs or those other kind of personality things, and figure out where things are, and you could come up with some understanding of a trust map for your whole organization. And that, in theory, will be lovely, but you have to be really freaking careful about how you use that, because some of those aliens in particular could use something like that to their advantage and everyone else's disadvantage. So you just have to be careful about how you do this. Okay. So I'm wondering now. I'm just trying to find Zoom here, and I'm just trying to find the chat. Okay, we've got no chat at the moment. Yesterday, when I did this, there was a whole massive discussion going on. So I was probably more boring yesterday. So be grateful for that. Just at this stage, before I go on to the next one, any questions or any thoughts, or uh, you can come on microphone, if that's the right way of putting it. Jan, do you want to go for it?
Um, when I did the presentation of this trust map, and you have this different levels of relationship quality, and on the bottom it's an adversarial relationship, and in the middle it's transactional relationship, and the highest one is a high trust, a collaborative relationship.
Love that.
And I did a whole thing about a transactional relationship, that it's really not something you want. And totally at the end of the presentation, one of the CEOs, who was sitting there all the time with his arms crossed, he said, "I don't think anything's wrong with a transactional relationship." So there, there went my full point
It,
on how to grow somewhere, and he didn't got it at all. He thought that it was perfectly fine to have transactional relationships,
isn't that
and
interesting?
yeah,
Yeah.
and the thing is, it was a transition, a management transition. So he would be the incoming new management, while
Ah,
the trusted senior person, he was leaving, and with his transactional relationship building, he thought he could. Well, he asked me to do the speech. So how can we grow trust during transitions? So he totally
yeah.
missed the point.
And I bet that he had become successful, very successful without trust.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, yeah. But with
Uh,
power, exerting
with
power. Yeah.
power. Yeah. And I can see that tends to work. And maybe he had a little, I wonder, maybe he had a little bit of acid in his blood.
Mm,
Um, wasn't full alien, but it's I don't want to go black and white about this, but I'm sure you've all heard of the idea that sociopaths and psychopaths, same thing, um, tend to rise up in organizations because
mm,
they're very good at being charming and ruthless at the same time. Um, and so for them, the idea of trust is just it's just never featured in their life because they've had a different tool set.
yeah.
I like to think, and I might be wrong, that most people aren't like that. Um, uh, but I don't know. I know for me, I've been successful when I've been able to use trust,
Mm.
which makes it sound like a tool, which it is. But when I've been trustworthy, it's made a big difference. Yeah, Damon.
Um, it it occurs to me that trust, I think, is also contextual. So you might, in one individual, you might trust that person to not stab you in the back, but at the same time, you might not trust them to get stuff delivered. They might be a procrastinator, or, you
Yes.
know, some degree of incompetence, and not maliciously, but just from a capability perspective. So there's different facets of even one individual that you may or may not trust to varying degrees, let alone, when you get into like power dynamics of you and a boss, or you and a peer that sees themselves as a bit of a competitor. I mean, so how would you sort of like map that out? Would you have like different maps, or would you just use like
Damon, my stooge, who asked the question that
you
leads
can
to
pay me later?
the next one. The check is in the mail. Excellent question. Right, how about I move to that one? Because this is, I'll just figure out how to move here. So now actually, if you look at that there and you got the lines, all that's just been you've put thickness of lines and you've thinned them out and put dotted things. Maybe you put arrows on them, or maybe you put some question marks there because you don't quite know what they're thinking, and you've just got this rough, ready map, kind of like James Cook sailing around New Zealand all of those centuries ago and drawing the outline. Then there's this big thing in the middle there. And you go, whoa, it'd be really cool if we could actually zoom in a little bit in this and see what a way of measuring it. And when I say measure, this isn't like measuring like you do with a GPS, with a satellite. It's not measuring to the meter. You're just trying to get a sense of trust. And there's 4 components that we can use to break them down. Not my work, but really handy. It's from Charles Green and David Maister and some other bloke whose name I cannot remember. Oh, sorry, I thought we were having an earthquake, but it was just a loud car. Um, they wrote a book called The Trusted Advisor, probably 25, 30 years ago. Now I'm going to take this. Oh, hang on. What I'll do, actually. Ah, no, I'm incompetent. Can you still see that? Yep. Oh, good. What I'm going to do is I'll pop this link in the chat. So if you want to read more about the trust map, this is the time I set it up there and LinkedIn. I wrote about it there. It's just useful. It's the same sort of stuff, but faster. And this one, this is called the trust equation. It comes from David Maister, Charles Green, and the other chap. And their website, the page there is really, really good. It takes these through and it breaks it down. It's got videos and it'll explain it much, much better than I can. But I've shared this with so many people when I work for them, because it's just like when you want to break it down, you go, how trustworthy is that person? Or how trustworthy do I think they think I am? It's just got these things that you can look at. And I just run through them. But I really recommend go have a look and read through that stuff. And they've put far more thought into trying to describe this. And they do a much better job than I do. So the first one, C, is credibility. So if I got a plumber, no, credibility. My brother is a builder. He got all of the building ability in our genes and all of the practicalness. And I write books and play with iPads. If you ask my family, that's what I do. So if you wanted someone to do something as simple and obvious as hang up a picture on a wall, his credibility is going to be way, 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 way above mine. Mine is going to be very, very low. So obviously you would trust him with respect to that job much more than you would trust me. But he's also notoriously late. And I used to be, but as I've got older and older and older, I've come to be a lot more on time. So I'm reliable relative to him. If you ask my wife, she would say, I'll hire a handy person to make sure it's done properly and on time. Never rely on a builder that's a relative, okay? So that's the first two. And those two are two of the obvious bits. I'm going to skip I for a moment, and then I'm going to go for self-orientation. Self-orientation is basically how selfish do you think they are? That's how I would put it. How much are they in this for them? And I'm sure you've had this where you've worked with people who are credible, reliable, and you just go, oh, there's an expression we have. I don't know if it translates around the world. And you might say, oh, my mum would say this, he's a money grubbing bastard. You know, and you just think, I don't know if that translates, but it's just, you just look, no, they're out for number one. Self-orientation. Not that it's bad to be look out for yourself. It's very bad, in fact, if you don't look out for yourself. But it's really, really bad if you feel like they're gonna basically rip you off or don't trust you, or they send out vibes of that. I started doing a little bit of partnering up with someone and a while ago, quite a while ago, and I had people saying to me, no, I just get this vibe off him. no, no, just back away, just back away. And he was really good at what he did, but he just put off this vibe of being all about him. And so I backed away based on other people's advice because I really liked him. But then when I stood back and I had that people saying it, it was just like, no, I think I'm always going to end off worse in this relationship. And I feel better about doing that. So just on self-orientation, what's really nice is if you hang on that this is more for the ladies on the call, I think. At least this is for my wife. When when you get on an aeroplane and they come over and they say, and if an oxygen thing falls down, and then they sort of almost scream out in silent words, Winnie, which is my wife's name, uh, put your own oxygen mask on first so that you can look after other people, like your kids. It's quite easy to be not self-oriented enough to actually be too giving, and that's also, I think, uh, yeah, you end people end up burning themselves out and not being maybe reliable around that. Okay, so I don't want to dwell on this, but just think you're looking at a person here and you're going, are they credible? Do I believe that they're competent? Now, keep in mind here that when you go, are they competent? There's two things here. One is the perception of competence and actual competence. Some people, especially those who are really self-oriented, are really good at self-promotion, and they might come across as being really, really credible, but they may not actually be competent. Okay, so now I'm overwhelming it here, but you know all this stuff. This is all the vibes. It's just a useful way of just breaking it down. So you've got credibility, you've got reliability. And if you actually repeatedly work with someone, you'll get a really good sense of those. And then you've got self-orientation. Now, the intimacy this is written for people who are advisors, like the consigliere to the godfather, the coach, the mentor. Um, the intimacy is kind of back how much it's like professional intimacy, just to be clear. It's how well do you know each other? How when you start talking, does the other person ask how your mum's getting on after she was in hospital 6 months ago? It's that kind of thing. And so you could have a really good kind of transactional relationship where they're credible and reliable. But the intimacy bit kind of just lifts it up a level, and it just makes it more. You would automatically bolden the line because you just go, yeah, we're close. Okay, so this is a really nice little way of just looking at all the relationships that are important to you and just breaking it down. And if you were like a computer geeky person and you really wanted to make this, you could go into a spreadsheet, right? You could go into a spreadsheet and you could come up with all the people around you. You could put CRI and then S, and you could put a little calculation and you could put all the names down here. And you could, if you really wanted to, and you don't need to do this. The trust map is kind of like the more rough and ready and useful version of it. And you could go from a scale from 1 to 5. How do I rate this person for credibility? You do the same from reliability, intimacy, and self-orientation. And then you might actually even go in and do it. How do I think they interpret me and score them on their behalf? And all you're doing is just trying to take your intuition, your gut feel of this relationship that you did when you draw the line on the chart, and you're just trying to tease it out a little bit further. And the numbers are kind of meaningless, but they all average about a 4. That probably means that you've got much higher trust than if you've gone through and they've all averaged a 1 out of 5. Okay. So again, all we're just trying to figure out is how can I improve trust a little bit with the people that I think it's worth doing that for. And I swear, if you memorize that or just Googled it, trust equation, one day in the next 2 weeks, you'll just go, hang on, I've got a vibe here about this person. got a vibe. I'm just not sure. And then you break it down. Just come get this and just try and break it down. And suddenly you go, ah, yeah, they are really reliable. I really know them well. I think they're really, really generous and not at all self-oriented, but they're absolutely incompetent. And I'm sure we all know people who, who are like that, and we like them, but we wouldn't want them to do the work because we know that the 2 days later, the picture frame is going to be smashed and on the floor. Okay. So your homework for this is to click on that link when you get a chance and just watch the videos. It's probably about 10 minutes worth. But it's a lot. They're really nice and really helpful. I honestly think that that's a game changer when you do that. Okay. Any thoughts or any questions? Yeah, looking good. Oh, I think I see typing.
I think that's kind of useful actually, because I think my default position is I trust people generally. I did your trust math a few years ago and didn't find it very useful because I don't think I applied anything like that to it. So it's like, yeah, everyone's fine.
Mhm.
So I think it is useful to have a framework actually, kind of give
Yeah,
me
that's
that
good.
ability, I guess. The
It-
self-orientation, I think, particularly, I'm probably quite weak on understanding. Are you
yeah,
for yourself or not?
my wife she's a psychiatrist. Um, and there's been several times in my life she said she effectively, no, back away from that person. And I go, no, 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 they're really nice. I go, no, 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 trust me here. I deal with people who are in jail, and they kind of got those similar wiring to them. Back away, back away. And I go, oh, who do I trust? My wife or my gut feeling? And then over time, I realized that my wife's almost all, when I say my wife's always right. Um, yeah, but it can actually be. Maybe there's another thing that we need as another measure, which is the level of our trust gullibility.
Yeah.
Damon.
Um, I like this equation because it kind of breaks things out. But my logical brain immediately goes to you apply this equation and you put your scores in and you get the scores out. Um, let's say for the sake of argument, you get a pretty much identical score or a very similar score, and you're left with, well, this person, this, and this person, this, and you're like, which one? And is that where the gut instinct comes in? And then my brain then went to the next level, like, well, just weight them. So if you weight credibility higher than intimacy, then but then when you then get two scores the same, you're still in the same boat. So I mean, does it have to come? Do you, in your experience, does it come down to like just gut feel and a hunch and making a call, or is it almost a case of don't
So
sweat it. If they're the same, then that just tells you
yeah,
something.
I actually think there's an awful lot of value in having both of those. But what it depends on what you're trying to use it for. Because if you're going, oh, I've got to work with Bob. Bob's come in, and I've heard things about Bob. Uh, but I don't know. I'm not sure about Bob. Uh, and then you might go and you're just going to go, which one of these is making me nervous? Because I just heard things. And then like the self-orientation one, you do pick up that vibe. You get a vibe and you can feel it but then actually, no, to be fair, um, it's it's not all of us are actually that good at picking up on that vibe. So maybe we go and talk to other people, but it's helping you try and make better decisions is really what you're aiming for. And actually, it's more than that. It's thinking if I'm going to work with Bob, what I'm going to do is it's going to be better if we trust each other. So maybe I go in and I talk to Bob and we start chatting and I share a little bit of something that's a wee bit personal, which would be just being I'm just thinking, how can I build trust? I'm going to share just this tiny little bit of intimate, the I there. And then I don't know, it might be, I don't know what it might be. It could even be, I slept really badly last night. So I'm really tired. Uh, and whatever the story. And a little bit of trust. If you were actually able to measure it, like with a meat thermometer and shove it into someone, you might see that it's gone up from 62 degrees to 63.5. Just with that tiny little bit of extra trust building.
When I look at it, I think it's a really useful framework for how you would build trust with, say, the Allen on your trust map, right? So you can sort of break it down into the components and say, where are the pieces where it's lacking, right? So say it's intimacy. Maybe in our next meeting, I'm a little bit more vulnerable. See if that
Yes.
works.
Yeah.
Maybe we just need to go out for drinks after work one day and get out of this environment and learn to trust each other in a different way. Um, so it can sort of break it down into components of why is the relationship not at the stage where I want it to be, and what are the things that I can work on, or possibly, how can I make up for it? I was thinking with your example, if I want to hang the picture, then I'm going to call and say, hey, Clark, can you pick up your brother and have him here by 9 o'clock? And I'll have donuts, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. And everyone's going, this is great. And then a while later, my brother needs something. And it turns out that Dan can repay the favor and it all works out. Nice. Yeah, yeah, that's really good. So that word comity, before, I'm just going to go back to it. Hang on, excuse me, someone's just a sec. Sorry, someone's calling me and they shouldn't be. There we go. It's only my daughter. She only wants money or advice on how to cook things. Just madness. There we go. What was I saying? Comedy. If you think about all of this, you just so when you spoke, Dan, then you could look at what you said as with a really cynical. I'm using trust as a tool. I'm going to sit in here, and I know you didn't mean it this way, but you could go, yeah, okay. But sometimes you do. You just think, I actually want to work in a courteous and considerate environment. And what you said then is, I'm actually just going to use my skills at being trustworthy to be courteous, um, and considerate, and make a nicer work environment. So I think, emotional intelligence, and you got social intelligence. Actually, that daughter there, the one that I just hung up on, many about, she's at university now, but about 4 or 5 years ago, teenage girl, dad, took her out to my mum's for dinner one evening, and I got and I said something, and afterwards, I got a real telling off in the car on the way home, and she said to me two things that really, really hurt. And the first one, Dad, you are the least funny person in the entire world, which really like stabbed me, because honestly, that was like, ugh. And then she said, turned to me, she said, and you have zero social intelligence. Um, Right, which was interesting because in a way that's kind of the thing that I think now that I'm in my 50s, that I'd never had that much of, when I was younger. But it's what social intelligence, emotional intelligence, it's a skill it's actually a skill as much as a thing that you're born with. And over the years, I've done an awful lot of work, because I found it was holding me back, to become better at doing these trustworthy things, at being good with people. And you could say that's all it is. It's being good with people. But why am I saying that? I'm saying it because, um, trust is this is about skills, and you can build trust. And so one way would be to figure out, who do I want to build trust with? Who do I want to put in that little containment zone so I just don't have to work with them? And then you would actually deliberately go and behave ever so slightly differently in order to build trust. And there's this lovely thing. I'm sure you all know of lean thinking. If lean thinking is about waste, then I reckon they've missed the biggest waste in all of the lean thinking literature, because at least the stuff that's based on factories. The biggest waste is low trust. Because when you have low trust, you have to do so much more work to get the same thing done. So you could, if you were cynical, say, if you went back to Jan's CEO, you go, trust is a productivity tool. And he goes, now I like it. Yeah. And it's hard to prove to people who can't see how that works. But do you all aware of the Reagan and Gorbachev when they did the denuking thing 30 years ago, I guess, 30 more years ago. And they set up these things where they were going to dismantle nuclear armaments in both countries. And the thing was, it's built on trust. But it wasn't absolute trust. It was actually what they said, it's trust and verify. So do you see there? They want to build trust, but there's an overhead because they don't trust each other fully yet, and maybe never will, that they also have to verify that the trust was actually earned, so that bad things haven't happened. So the verification is an extra burden of work. And so it's actually, it's a productivity killer. But it's also probably something that they did to, over time, build trust bit by bit by bit. Okay, so now I'm going to keep going here. Come back to that. So we've got our trust map, big picture, and it's kind of like, who do we kind of not focus on? Who do we focus on? And who do we also move into the containment zone for our own health and success? There's nothing worse for destroying a culture than one alien getting on board your spaceship and dripping acidic blood all over the place. Right, now we've got a way here of looking at trust is this big, funny word, trustworthiness, actually. Just notice this. There's 3 ways of breaking it down. And now there's lots of different things you can do to be more trustworthy or to build trust. And I mentioned this before. Imagine the meat thermometer and you could shove it in and it gives you, oh, it's 42 degrees. And you go, okay, over the next 2 weeks, I want to see if I can take that to 45. Okay, the quickest way to lose trust is go 42. I'm going to take that to 85 next week. Right, let's build trust. And suddenly it just overwhelms and it acts. So trust is something you build slowly and cautiously, and you got tons of time to do it. And actually, when I think about it, sometimes with trust, you don't ignore those other people that are on the, you don't suddenly start becoming less trustworthy with the others, but a lot of the time you're just doing stuff that protects the trust that you've mutually built up over the years. Okay, yeah, I'm going to go to the last one now. This is the boring one, right? If you really, really, really want to be, if you, I don't know, if you just given up on life and you just want to go, oh my God, and you can't sleep and you want some uplifting thoughts, don't go and read the book by this guy. It's dreadfully Fernando Flores. He was, I think the technical term is a complete arsehole, if you'll forgive me. He was a Chilean guy, and when he was 29, I think this would be in the 80s. He was the finance minister in Chile, and then General Pinochet came in, took over the country, and threw him in jail. And while he was there, He'd read a lot of philosophy books, and he was really clever, and the stuff he came up with was really, really, really clever. But underlying it, it was just like, oh my God, how to make this stuff really boring, but it's also useful. So I'm gonna so now I've set the expectations low. If I can make this just a little bit useful, then I think I've won, right? Because this is incredibly useful. He wrote a book called, might have been called Building Trust. And it was brutal. Now, I know a lot of other people like it, but I just can't cope with big words and things. And I was supposed to read it as my job working for this consulting company that sold trust, because they bought all of his intellectual property and sold it. And they called that commitment-based management. And it was all about really building trust. And a lot of it was around by making promises that are good promises and then keeping them, which would, you think about it, would be being reliable. If you keep your promises as being reliable. Now, so I don't recommend you go off and read his stuff unless you find this interesting and you're good with big words and philosophy and stuff, because you might really enjoy it. I know some people do. It just doesn't connect with my brain. So let me tell you about this model, and let me just try and simplify it for you. And you should be able to see, I think, my mouse. Can you see my mouse on the screen there? Yeah, okay, cool. So notice that this is conversations for action. So talking to get stuff done. Okay. And this is called the loop. And this is what we call it. This is when I work with a place called Vision Consulting, and they bought his stuff from his company called Business Design Associates, I think, BDA, 25 years ago now for me. It's a loop. So what it does is this kind of like starts on the left-hand side over here where the customer is, around here, and it loops around to here. It's just like one trip around it. So it's a process, really, for having good, high-quality conversations for action, talking about getting stuff done. And now notice on the left, there's a customer and a performer. So if I was really keen, I don't know if I can do this on the fly, I would go person. And I'll drag that down there. So there's a person there, the customer, and there's a person there, twin brothers. And they're chatting, so they're having a conversation. And what they're starting with, and I'm going to just highlight this because it's really, when I worked with this company, they had their own special language. And that one there, they would talk about requests a lot. So if you want to get stuff done, you might go to someone else and you'll make a request. Okay, so this is just about requests. Me as the customer, I'm going to ask Bob as the performer to do something for me. Okay, really, really obvious, right? Or you might do the equivalent of request, but it's actually an offer where you offer to do something for them. It's like a request in reverse. And they all kind of live in the same thing here. Now, quite often what happens is you just go to them and you just tell them. So it's actually more an instruction or a command. Give them an order. But this stuff here, we're trying to get more out of the conversations that we have. And what we're trying to do is halfway through, we're trying to end up with two promises. One which is from the performer that says, hey, yeah, I can do that request and I'll have it back to you by Monday. And one from the customer that gives a request of course, and before you start that, I'll send on the PDF about the blah, blah. So we're looking for two promises. And now remember, this was called commitment-based management. And it's all about making commitments and keeping them, or making promises and keeping them. So commitment, promise, same thing. Now, see in this loop, there's actually 4 bits to it. you've got preparation. So that's kind of obvious, but it's often skipped. It's getting, oh, right, what do I as a customer want out of this before I actually go and make this request? And you might sit down and think about things and get them all cleared out, and then you go make the request to the person. But when you make the request, Flores used the word negotiation, and it's like you might go sit there and go and hey Bob, I need this thing, and it's da 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 da, and I've thought about it, I need this, this, and this is what I'm looking for. Can I have it by Friday? And Bob says, and he effectively negotiates and says, oh no, I could do the first half by Friday. If you go and talk to Sarah and maybe ask Sarah to handle that thing for me. She won't do it if I ask her, but if you as the boss do, okay. So that's part of this negotiation. And I can do the second part maybe the following week, but why don't we check in on Friday, see what you think about the first part, and then you've negotiated. You've taken this request into, can you do this? And you fleshed it out and so on. And when you're doing this, the performer, the green fella here, will ideally have a chance to do some preparation as well. So if it's detailed enough or needs a bit of preparation, so that when you're coming together, you can actually have a really good chat. Okay, now, so all of this is kind of really obvious that so many things when they go wrong in conversations, these things don't happen. So I'm telling you here, this is like the happy day scenario where people actually prepare before they make a request. Or they actually bother to make a request rather than just a command. They negotiate and then make sure they understand things and all of that. They go off and do it, and then they come back, say, I've finished, and then they go, yes, that's good, or it's not. So many times these things get missed and they create a lot of work. Now, when you're negotiating and preparing, you're going to come up with these things called the conditions of satisfaction. Now, remember, this came from this work done during the 70s and 80s and 90s, and people use really big words. So conditions of satisfaction, just imagine, I think a lot of us probably go, it's just like a list of what does good look like? Or if you've come from, say, an agile background, you might go, what's the definition of good, or what's our acceptance criteria? Or we could go, let's come up with a checklist so that when we run through, and we'll just talk it through as part of the negotiation to make sure we're on the same page. And often you'll discover things just by fleshing it out to realize it's good or not. So Flores called this the conditions of satisfaction. And one of the things as part of that involved time. So this is just before you go and do anything, you're just sitting down going, what's good going to look like? And you're effectively coming up with an agreement. And then at the end of it, you make these two promises. So really obvious. This is obviously how things should work. And then the performer goes off and does stuff down here in performance. And then they finish it and they say, hey, I've finished. And then the customer says, hey, yep, I'll have a look at that. Brilliant. Thank you. Declare satisfaction. And they'll declare satisfaction by going, hey, did it match that stuff we put in our conditions of satisfaction checklist at the beginning? So really nothing complicated about this. It's just that if you don't do these things up front in particular, the performer often ends up going off and doing something different, coming back and creating disappointment. And they might actually look incompetent if you think of the credibility. Or they might come back 3 weeks later and then here it is, and the guy says, I needed that 2 weeks ago. And it's like, well, why didn't you tell me? Da, 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 da. Wouldn't it be nice if they just chatted about this to start with? So this all comes from the idea of building trust. And there's a bunch of different things on it. But the bit that I'm most interested in, actually, no, when I think about when I learned this, the bit that was most interesting for me is that I had lived in the performance world. And that is where we spend most of our time. So we spend most of our time doing performance. And often we skip these two here and we end up not uncovering the conditions of satisfaction, not making a promise based on what is really good for both of us, doing a lot of work for it, and then having to rework it, or we disappoint people. And if you can take this through and make sure that you haven't skipped these sections, when you get to performance, it usually goes a lot faster. And also, actually, when you get into performance, as part of this, you may actually talk about, obviously, how are we going to keep each other up to date on how things are going? So you might come up with rules of engagement, I guess you might call them, if you like big words. You know, it's just like, oh, how about we catch up every Thursday, 10 o'clock. We'll take turns buying coffee, and we'll just have a quick update on things, how things are. And it's really good if you sort that stuff out beforehand. And what you'll find is that really successful people have usually figured out how to just do this in a really nice way. There's this guy called Patrick, and he lives in Wellington, and I worked with him 30 years ago. And when I first met him, he was I think he was a local branch manager of a bank. And he got good at that. And then he came and worked with the IT teams. And he had this amazing way of working, which I just sit and go, how does he do that? And then I realized what he would do is he'd come down, he would have thought about something he wanted from you. He would sit through, chat about it, and he'd clearly prepared and thought about it. He'd sit down and he'd have this nice discussion where you sort of negotiated things. He would make it clear. So, and he'd write it down in his diary. So if I come back to you on Friday, you're definitely going to be good for that. And I go, yeah, yep. Okay, Friday, and then become it cemented in my mind. And then I backwards would and then he'd say, hey, but just give us a yell if there's going to be any problems, okay? And I go, okay, cool. And he stood out in my mind because I'd never worked with anyone that was just so simple. It was just a joy to work with because it was just really nice. It was no command and control, but everything just worked really smoothly in his life. And then I moved away, and then about 20 years later, when I meant to come back to New Zealand, I discovered that he was the CIO. He'd gone from being branch manager to CIO. And I think a lot of it was because he naturally worked this way. And so he built trust. I still have, I feel fondly towards him 30 years later, which is the strangest thing. But he was just a good, trustworthy bloke, as we would say. Okay, now, there's one thing. You might have been seeing this chappy here lurking over here in the corner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that line. I'm going to cross out the word negotiation. Because when I hear negotiation, I think of the horror of having to sit in a car salesperson's office while they're busy playing their games, going and talking to the manager. And I'm busy making, I have to talk to my wife before we do this. And we're busy negotiating, and it just feels, ugh. I prefer for people like us the word co-creation. And I think this is where it doesn't come through in this. When I was taught this, it was kind of like implied in this. What you're trying to do when you do negotiation is actually create something that really delights everyone. And that comes from talking about the conditions of satisfaction, the timing. And can you imagine the customer comes and says, hey, Bob, I need this and this. And I've thought about it, and I reckon we could do that, that, and that. And Bob listens and goes, yeah, that's really cool. And then Bob says, we could do that. But did you know that since you last worked on this, the XYZ components become available? And it probably cut this down. And you go, wow, that's amazing. Oh, I'm so glad we spoke about this. And suddenly you've got a far better solution because you actually had a conversation and you co-created. So if I like, you know how almost all words, if you look in management books, apart from mine where I had focus, but they all tend to have 3 C's, or they have 4 P's, or whatever, right? Co-creation has 2 C's in it, so it's really cool. Collegial, comity. There's just some really good C words. Conversations. I like the co-creation, and what I've found is that as I'm working with people, basically just what it says is just go have a chat and go co-create something with the other person. Have a good chat where it's just like you're coming to a barbecue, and people everyone brings a different thing for a potluck, and so you end up having a much richer meal because you've co-created a thing rather than one person just doing all the cooking. And I think that's where I know we call that synergy. It's like the blue customer over here arrives with one, the green arrives with one, and then we start chatting and we end up with three. And I think that's kind of like the essence for this. And this is where you get rid of you actually build trust, but you also build better solutions. Not every time. Sometimes it can just be transactional. Here you go. Right, now I'm just going to move on, and then we can just have some quick questions. Catitude. Right. Now, two things about this. First thing about catitude is that imagine you're walking on the street. It's a lovely evening. There's a cat, and you like cats. And you look at the cat, and the cat looks at you. And you look back, and the cat looks back, and you both know that you're supposed to go over and rub the cat on the head. You just know that it's just implied. So what you don't do is like try and turn the 5 to a 10 instantly. You go, oh, cat doesn't really know me. Cat might think I'm actually potentially an axe murderer. So what I'm going to do is walk up gently, and I'm going to hold my hand out. I'm going to let the cat just sniff my hand. And then a moment later, the cat might just rub against my hand, and I might then scratch the cat on the head. And then the cat might roll over, and I'm allowed to rub them under the chin. And then you might get up and go away. And then the next day you go for a walk. And the next day when you go to meet the cat looks up and goes, oh, I remember you. Rushes over, you kneel down, scratch him on the head, under the chin. He rolls over, and then you're allowed to rub him on the chest. And then 3 or 4 months later, you actually get to the point where you're allowed to rub him on the belly without him digging his claws into you, because you just went a little bit too far, and he turns himself into a claw-wielding cat glove. But it takes time. So you just step into this little bit by little bit by little bit, just like you would make friends with a cat. And notice that day after day, you don't the trust that you builds upon accumulates over time. And when I got taught this stuff, it was maybe it's just part of the marketing material, but it was like the idea that it spirals out and it gets bigger and bigger. So small increments in trust, effectively they build, and they almost like snowball. Every turn it gets bigger and bigger. So that's the first part about catitude. The second part is that a friend of mine, Rosalind, Ali, and I have been on the same Facebook Messenger group, the three of us, for I'm not sure 10, 12 years now. And she came and she said, I've just learned the most amazing thing. And she said, some people are like cats and some people are like dogs. Oh, just think about it at work. Some people are like cats. They go, yeah, not sure about you. Very bit standoffish, but sort of maybe a little bit more self-oriented. And some people are like dogs, rush over, tail wagging, licking your face and jumping up, and they want to be your best friend and all that kind of stuff. And I remember her saying this. She goes, and I realized, talking about herself, I'm definitely a puppy dog. I'm just like, I'm a puppy dog. And she goes, and Ali, I know you're much more of cat-like. And he was much more just sort of straight up, but intensely loyal. One of my best friends for years. I used to work for him, and one of the most trustworthy. He's where I actually learned all of this this looping stuff and so on. And as I thought about this a while later, I realized that both of them had a bit of cat and a bit of dog, and they just exhibited they just were maybe more one than the other. But I reckon you need a bit of both. And I remember Rosalind actually saying to me, she said, I haven't figured out what you are, Clark. I just cannot figure it out. And I go, oh, um, and I thought about it a lot. And I think I have both, but I think I was naturally for a long time much more puppy dog like, trying to please everyone, trying to help everyone. It was almost like I had too much of the opposite of self orientation. I would overhelp, I would sacrifice, I would get everyone else's oxygen masks on, and sit there breathing thin air for myself. And then over time, in fact, I've just realized the moment I started to change that was when I read a book that was actually written for women called, I think it was called A Woman in Her Own Right. And it was about being assertive. And I read that and suddenly realized that I didn't have the puppy dog language in, that I actually had to be more looking after myself. And I think I think I went from dog to being much more cat-like. Uh, and I think that made me much more trustworthy. So I just think that not by saying yes and trying to be the ultimately most helpful, wonderful, amazing person ever in the world, I actually think by slowing down and thinking about, oh, preparing for stuff before I said yes. And in fact, I think saying no quite a lot more. So when you're in that negotiation loop, you don't have to end with a promise. You can actually say, no, I can't do that. And I think as I got those things, I became much more trustworthy. So cat's good, dog's good. But don't be too much only the cat, because only that cat that never wants, so purely transactional. Never just the dog that's just pure spit and slobber and puppy dog tails. Right. And if I go back up here and go, ta-da! And now I am going to stop the sharing and just come back and just see what you all think of that. Any thoughts? And no thoughts are just as good.
Going back to the equation, and
Yes.
you in a similar role to me, you're working with kind of external customers a lot and needing their trust in order to do better. I quite like your discussion about lean, that a lack of trust is a waste or generates waste.
Yep.
And we often focus on credibility, don't we, and reliability in that space, in terms of the equation.
Yeah.
Sorry, just thinking out loud. It takes
Good.
me back right to the beginning of this where you said you're not an expert on trust. And so immediately your credibility level was kind of set to a point where we weren't going to be disappointed, I suppose. Well, we weren't disappointed. Not that we'd be disappointed, but do you know what I mean? It was kind of, you set the expectation,
Yeah.
almost a reverse manipulation of the of that equation, and thinking about how other
Actually,
people perceive your trustworthiness in that world too.
there's I'm trying to say this without sounding big-headed, like I might run for president of a big country one day. I know I'm really good at building trust, because people have told me that. But but I didn't used to be. And I think probably when I started, actually, I'm just sort of reflecting on that. I think when I started, I probably said that because I was trying to set people at ease. And one of the things about being trustworthy is not overselling, and then under delivering. So if you think about being reliable, undersell, over deliver. But then it's like the work I do with big projects. One of the 13 moves that you got to do is move from overselling and then under-delivering to underselling and over-delivering, but doing it transparently. So what I'm sure, actually, this is really interesting. It becomes all about me. I find me fascinating. Haha. But I know a lot of people have said to me that one of the things that they like when they work with me is that I tend to be good at building trust, and I think I've just learned a lot of this. But if there's anything, it's just the overarching bit is just this: is that cat, the cat on the street. Just if you don't be too helpful, just take it slowly, build a bit of trust, and it gets easier. That say, I'm sure there are people out there who actually who I've had work with where I go, God, we've both gone never again. And it's not all the circumstances. Actually, one of the things I was thinking, I mentioned right at the start how I had one thing where it went wrong, and they actually wanted a civil war, and they got me as a change manager, and I was a peacetime consigliere. That was actually, I'm sure I have a damaged reputation in that place. Though actually, I think the guy that hired me then had to leave that and move city because he got caught doing a whole lot of fraudulent stuff that made it into the papers, but no names were there. So anyway, I don't know. Maybe I thought he was quite trustworthy. So there you go. I'm starting to ramble now. Any other thoughts or questions? Hannah, did you want? You almost look like I'm just getting this funny vibe that you might want to say something, but you might not. And I don't mind either way.
No, I'm just not sure what to say, but I'm thank you for the input. I already knew some of your tools from earlier, but I found the trust equation really helpful because people tell me I'm very trustworthy, but some people don't, or some people don't trust me, and I wonder why. And I found that I think it's a probably a bit of a cat and dog problem. That's very
Yeah.
interesting because I don't tend to be very interested in personal details of other people.
Yep.
So the intimacy part is a bit lacking in some aspects, and that was the equation was very helpful. And the other thing is that I also have puppy qualities, trying to overpromise and doing everything and
Mm-hmm.
then not being reliable. So that was very helpful for my personal reflection, and I hope I can use that insight to improve my
Well,
relationships at work now.
one of the things someone used the word before, and it's a word I blank on, probably because I don't think it starts with C. Brené Brown, she wrote the book about it, and she did the talk about vulnerability. I, I think that's either the same as intimacy or very close cousin to it. Now I saw a talk once at a conference where someone had clearly just read that book and came out and was just incredibly vulnerable. And then I realized afterwards that she had actually just done it deliberately. She had read the book, so I'm going to be vulnerable, and I wasn't quite sure how to interpret that afterwards. I wasn't sure if it was false or I'm just using this to get people on my side, or whether I'm. But the reason I'm suggesting this is because I actually I did a keynote at the same conference the following year, and I had actually been in hospital and nearly died 6 weeks earlier. And honestly, the week before, I couldn't walk more than 100 meters, but I managed to go to the conference, get up there, do my hour, and no one knew I was sick. But then I just collapsed afterwards. Not like medically, just gone. But while I was off sick, I happened to chance on the sales book that talked about the power of effectively faking vulnerability. It's effectively, and it said basically what it's saying is if you're more intimate, and I think I looked at that with cynical eyes, and I thought at the time that's just the wrong thing to do. But then it must have sunk in, and I got up and I actually told a very vulnerable story at this conference, about my first time trying to do Agile and what led me to write Rolling Rocks Downhill and all of this stuff. And it happened that one of the senior managers that worked in that company, he wrote me a note and actually said, I almost cried when I watched a recording of your talk to think that you went through that. And I wasn't actually faking vulnerability, but I just got up. It was just actually really real, probably based on being quite sick, and really, really just tired. But it was really interesting how me sharing something like that, which was actually just a little thing, actually got this big grumpy executive almost crying when he's watching videos on a Sunday night at home. So the reason I'm mentioning that is the intimacy bit. I never got it when I first read about this stuff, but I'm wondering maybe if vulnerability is a nicer, more accessible kind of way of thinking about it, and it's just been a little bit more vulnerable. Um, and even if you're doing it as just something that's actually, what you're actually doing is you're being generous to the other person. By doing it, and you might think, oh, I'm doing this and it's almost like a technique and I'm using it, and is there a manipulation involved? You could overthink it like that, but it's actually just being collegial and getting that comedy. It's just being thoughtful to the other person, sharing a little bit. Yeah. So sorry, I overspoke that, but I was reliving a past glory, and you didn't all hang up all at once, so that's good.
No, thank you. That's a good perspective to see the intimacy part as being courteous and kind,
Yeah, yeah,
and vulnerable.
and it's generous.
Hmm.
Yeah. And in a way,
And
you could actually think it is almost like you're putting your oxygen on and their oxygen on at the same time. So it's good for everyone. Yeah. Sorry, I'll stop. Any other thoughts or any other?
I have a question, Clark. I loved your presentation and all
Thank
the
you.
ideas. So what happens when you made an assessment and you understand that the relationship is not good between two people? And I always like to add the perception. Who so you have two people, and the perception of the trust is not a common thing. You perceive each other differently.
Yes. Yeah.
So when you take a perception from one person to the other, and you say, okay, I have issues with this person, and they're serious issues. For instance, he never looks at me. He doesn't have my back. He has different intents.
Yep.
So I have established this through assessments or whatever. So how do you start a conversation to address this?
That now I've got to admit something here. In my life, I have deliberately set it up so I don't have to work with many other people. So, and I've been able to pick and choose quite a lot who I get to work with. So I've managed to avoid most of that stuff because I don't actually like having these conversations. But I do coach a lot of people about how to have these conversations. So that's just me. And if someone else described that, I would ask them first off, is it worth it? Are they actually the person? Is it actually affecting you? Could you put them in a containment zone? Because that might be one alternative. Or you might just look and go, all right, that cat has obviously been scared by people walking down the street and kids scaring it or throwing stones at it, or maybe so maybe I might just approach with just a tiny little bit of caution. I might just say just something nice, just in passing. I think the thing I personally wouldn't advise people to do, but it could be the worst advice in the world. Don't go at it head on. Would be my thought. Just sneak up on it. I don't know. I don't know if this translates.
Would you ask for mediation?
I know people have done that.
To create a sort of a safe environment where you can ask or put your concerns on the table, and have them in a safe way addressed?
Yeah. I think you could do that sometimes. I guess it would all depend. Some people are really good at being the mediator, like a boss will often do that. Sometimes you can also do it without them having them in the same room. You can
Okay.
have someone who moves from this person to this person.
Okay.
I think it all depends. I guess it depends on the skills that the people involved have in
Mm.
having conversations. What would you think? Because I know you work in what would your advice be?
Well, quite often, especially in a work environment, people don't really know each other. And
Mm,
they got irritated or frustrated with each other. For instance, one person doesn't mind coming on time. He doesn't really care, and the other
yeah,
person is really a stickler for being on time. And when it's never addressed, the person who is always on time can be get quite irritated by the other one. But when you
yes.
never talk about it, it also spills into the other stuff. So
Mm,
when can I have your report? Yes, I will give it to you on tomorrow, and it obviously doesn't come next day. So another frustration. Um, but if both are ignorant about this, the conversation, first of all, the realization, okay, this is where my problem is. And the
yeah,
second one is, okay, if this is my problem, we have to talk about it. I have to make myself clear to this other person. And
yes.
then you can rebuild it. And then when the stickler notices the other person coming on time and delivering on time, trust is rebuilt.
Yeah.
Um,
Actually, that's good.
but
I'm thinking of Patrick, the guy who became the CIO, the bank
mhm,
guy became. When I think about how he worked, he just went in and he just and I guess this is actually much more how I work now as well. Would be if there was a problem like that, we might sit down if there's something important and just say, hey, what's good look like? We got this thing
mhm.
here.
Yeah,
What's
yeah,
good
yeah,
look?
exactly.
It might start the conversation,
Yeah, yeah. But you see,
and
in so many relationships, that first part is skipped, and you never choose your colleagues, and you all of a sudden work with each other, and you got a new boss or dynamics change,
mm,
and now you have to all adapt and work with it. And so understanding what's bothering you, that's number one, and the
yeah,
second one is engage in a meaningful conversation.
yeah, which is so hard. Maybe we
Yes,
could, if
yes,
we could
it is.
do it all through text messages and in emojis. It would be just so much easier, wouldn't it? I
I
think
had
we
this
do it.
if you allow me to
Yeah, go.
give a very short um, story about, I was a manager of a studio, and I rearranged the studio into teams. And two senior designers came up to me separately and said, I don't want to work with him. And half a day later, the other person came and I don't want to work with her. And I knew they probably would match. So I said, okay, why don't you go to dinner together? Give me the bill and we'll talk about it after. And since then, they have worked for over 30 years as very, very close
Wow,
colleagues in different companies. So
isn't it funny? Yeah.
it's simply um, making sure you have the right conversations can solve a lot of trust issues.
Mm. You used a word before that came from Flores as well. It came in. So I would hear when I did the loop kind of thing,
Mhm.
Fernando Flores, uh, you'd hear words that I hadn't heard before. Like you would hear that it just was like the world was full of these words. So there was like commitments, promises, requests, offers, offers, conditions of satisfaction. And then there was one that was really, really magical. And when it was used, it was just really, it just sort of led to good conversations. And it was just like, I have a concern. And
Mm.
it wasn't saying you're an idiot. It was like, I have a concern. And it just opened up the conversation. It was like this little, and there was another one that I learned many years later. Um, It's like when you just start saying something, hey, look, I don't want to trigger you, but I have a concern. And those two were really magical because they started the conversation, and it was easy to remember just to say, oh, I have a concern. And it just set everything up to have a nice conversation. Yeah. Okay. That's really cool. Thank you for that.
Can you map that back to the equation that maybe this is really obvious? The credibility, reliability, and intimacy. It's not just credibility, reliability. It is what is the delta between what one person expects your credibility to be and what you're
Yes.
delivering. And those
Yep.
conversations kind of normalize that expectation so that your credibility meets their expectations rather than just
Yes.
being a need.
Yeah, it is, and it's funny. Words are just so freaking clever, aren't they? When you exchange words, and uh, I reckon. No, I'm just making this up. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could all go on the I don't know what the police officers are like in the countries you live in, but most of the police officers, they get taught how to calm things down, and they get taught a language of how to actually be powerful as well as not powerful when it works, and they get to work with people and use words in a way that just they just learn how to use their words much better than we do, and I guess call center people do, a lot of the time, and presumably people that work in the front of a front of house in a restaurant, they will either have been born with or will have learned ways to use words that just change their environment for the better. Whereas the ones in the you like to imagine the ones in the back of the restaurant, they use quite different words, from what I've heard. And yet they also use those words to get things done. I guess, sorry, I'm getting a bit philosophical now. Words, words, words. Hey, I'm going to wrap up now because it's way past my bedtime. And unless there's anything else anyone wants to say, I don't actually have to go. I'm not tired. If anyone else has any sort of final thoughts or anything, okay.
No, just to say thanks. This was great.
Oh, you're very welcome. Lovely to hear your accent there, Kieran.
There you go.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. You all go and do some proper work now. Yeah.
Have a good night. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Doug.
Cheers,
Bye,
guys.
guys.